What's up, everybody? Sean with Easy Street Billiards here. Got Vic in the background, as always.
Hello.
Subject of today's AMA will be tilt and what to do about it. Pretty exciting. I think that we're just going to start with like a little bit of a description of what's going on, and just so that you can understand the situation. I would say that the way I describe tilt for myself is any time that my emotions have gotten the best of me and I'm unable to follow my best process for playing pool or living my life. And I think it's happens a lot when we are playing in competitive matches or practicing or just doing other things. We're going to talk specifically about pool here. So when you're practicing or you're playing a match or just messing around with your homies on the table, just hitting balls, it's easy to kind of let yourself be free to explore, and that's great. I think that one thing that can happen is that if you're really trying to improve at the game and you're working hard at it, it's difficult sometimes to see the progress. So then you can have like a little bit of frustration, like you're working on the shot and you just can't get it down, or you're playing in a match and then you miss a couple balls, or your opponent starts getting lucky or something like that, or your opponent's playing really well, way above what your expectation of their ability is, and then you're not expecting that performance to be at such a high level, and that can put you in an emotional situation that you're not really ready for. So based off of that sort of diagnosis, I think that the best thing to do is a step-by-step process, really, where it's mostly about awareness. If you aren't aware of what's happening at the moment that things are going on, then you're going to kind of be caught off guard by it, and then you might have an even increased negative response to something that actually starts out as a very small and manageable thing. And I think that each person has their own way about them, their own set of habits and normal behaviors, and then as we identify in ourselves these are the ways that I go on tilt occasionally when certain types of things happen, and because of that I need to find a process to get myself back in the game. I think a lot of it has to do with more about anything than anything else is realizing that our emotions that we're feeling at the moment can get triggered by anything that's happening around us. The thing that I think people forget about at the moment that you're feeling an emotion is how impermanent the emotion is. They've done studies on this, and it's like each emotion that you feel will only last for approximately 90 seconds unless you attach to it, and then you're basically perpetuating a 90-second cycle as many times as you feel like it, ultimately, until you either realize that this is not how I want to feel, and then you work towards changing your emotion to another emotion, or you just continue to re-engage and harmonize and resonate with that emotion, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you can't hold it anymore, and then that's when the blow-up happens. But earlier on in that cycle, you can start to really identify in yourself. It's a lot of it has to do with a build-up and then an explosion, more so than just something that gradually falls apart on you, and then it's kind of it's a little bit of the same thing. It's like it slowly starts to fall apart and you're not noticing that. You need to do the maintenance to make sure that you get back to where you want to be, or it's a buildup of strain or stress, and then now there's an explosion, and now all of a sudden you basically reach the same point either way. It doesn't matter which way it goes. It's more about your personal experience and how it is for you that things start to go wrong, and identifying when they start to go wrong before they've gotten so big that it gets to be difficult to manage. So I think that for me, the most important thing is really to just focus on the process of what you're doing, and then be aware of what's going on as much as you can so that you can make adaptations and modifications as you go along so that things don't get too out of control for you to where now it's a big deal. Not to say that it's not, that that's going to happen. When you're totally like in the grips of the emotion, there's really not much that can be done immediately. You're going to be feeling that emotion until you recognize that it's there, that you decide, in fact, actually, it's okay to feel this emotion, and then you can just feel the emotion, and then it will pass, without you doing anything about it. It's like it's a wave of ups and downs. If we allow the wave to continue to build and we try to push the emotion away, it's just going to actually get more into us. So we need to really see that the emotion's happening, be okay with the emotion, don't be in denial of the emotion, have the acceptance of the emotion. That's the first step, is like, oh, I'm actually feeling this way. Well, now we can start to really make some progress, where if you're feeling an emotion and you don't want to feel that emotion, then it's like, okay, well, at first there's really not much you can do, and then after you start feeling it, then you're like, okay, well, what did I come here to do? And then what do I need to do to make that happen? And a lot of it's just a perspective shift. Whatever got you to that place is the thing that if you change the way you're perceiving it, then you can't go to that place. It's like you're in control of your own emotions, so to speak. Where if I allow certain things to happen, and then I don't work towards keeping myself at an even keel, place where I'm just like in balance, then it just eventually I'm going to fall off the wagon and then just be like out of balance. So you got to find for yourself, okay, this is where I'm at, this is where I want to go, and then create some behaviors, so for instance, we'll talk about a little bit about different mindfulness techniques. A lot of this is just focusing on your awareness, but also I think that there's a lot of times when we can talk about going into these situations, we're setting ourselves up to have these big emotions that are out of our control, because we're going into these situations with expectations that are out of alignment with what's actually possible in reality. Where we say you're playing a match and you're like, I want to beat this player. I'm a favored, say we're playing a pool tournament, it's like race to 5, 9 ball, and you're playing against an opponent that is 50 to 75 Fargo points lower than you, and you feel like, oh, well, I should be able to beat this player. Most of the time here, Fargo says I'm going to win 80% of the time in a race to 5, so I should expect to win. Then we go into the match and you miss, an early 8 or 7 ball, and then now all of a sudden they win that game. Then, maybe they get lucky, miss the ball and leave you safe, and then you don't make a good hit, or you make a hit and you sell out, and now they're up 2-0. And now all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, well, how am I going to come back from this situation? I was thinking it was going to be so easy, and then now I'm in trouble, And the whole problem that you created for yourself is you created an expectation that things are going to happen, and you're not in control of those things. All you can control is that at the moment that things are happening, what you're going to do right then. You can't look into the future and decide that somebody's going to miss balls for you, or that you're going to run out from everywhere no matter what, and then they're going to win. You're going to win. That's not how it works. By setting yourself up in a situation where you can't control all the things that need to happen for you to feel good, you're automatically putting yourself in a situation where you're going to fall apart. You can't expect to win and then have that be reasonable expectation. If you're a great player, you can expect to win, but you know that you're going to win because of your adherence to your best process. The best players in the world, they don't necessarily think or don't think about winning. They obviously want to win, but they know that they can't control the outcome of where the balls are necessarily going to go, and that their only way that they can really survive and adapt and thrive is to not think about that so much and think more about what they can control, which is their current mindset and their current best process, the best thing to do right now to get what I want. That's what they concern themselves with, not so much an expectation that they're going to like, oh, I've just been playing my best pool of my life, so then my expectation is that now all of a sudden I'm going to continue to do that for the next rest of my life. It's like they know that in order for them to get to that level, they have to continue to make modifications and changes and adaptations to their best process so that they could then continue to grow and get better. Because as soon as you start just resting on your laurels, age catches up to you. The familiarity with something that you've been doing all the time, if you take a little bit of a step back and then you're like start taking a little bit of a breather, now all of a sudden that stuff is less familiar, and then now you've lost a step, and then you're back to where you were, where you're like, okay, it just doesn't get easier. That's the thing, is like the better you get, the more you have to deal with other different things. It doesn't just get simpler. The game actually gets more difficult. You just get better at dealing with all these little things through different techniques that you're learning. And then I think that at the pro level, they're just very much better about realizing that what matters is when I'm at the table that I make a clear decision about what needs to be done, what I need to do, and then I have a process by which I accomplish my goal, and that I know what that process is, and that if I adhere to it, then regardless of the outcome of the shot, then I'm being successful, and that I don't know if the ball is actually going to go in. It is a likely outcome based off of me knowing that if I use my best process, that there's no higher percentage way for me to do the thing. If you don't know what your best process is, then you'll never really be able to figure out exactly how to get yourself off tilt, because one of the things that I do when I'm not necessarily playing my best pool is I focus on what my process is, and that takes my mind off of what's actually going on and focuses more on towards what I'm about to do next, which is a step-by-step process that allows me to then to focus on what actually is happening, what I'm about to do, more so than expectations or, in the moment, like little lucky things or unlucky things or whatever you call it. None of that has anything to do with what's about to happen next, which is that we're going to do our best. And part of doing your best is just having a locked in routine. If you fall off your routine and you get lazy, you get a little bit sloppy, you get excited, you can forget to do the thing that got you to that place, and then all of a sudden things aren't going your way, and you're like, well, what happened? We're like, well, you stopped following your process because you started thinking the game was going to get easier because you started making balls and it seemed effortless at that moment. The reason why it was effortless was for whatever reason. It doesn't matter. The pros know that if you just because it's looking easy right now, it doesn't mean that in 10 minutes that's going to be the same. You miss a ball and all of a sudden you're like, oh, what did I do wrong? And you start going through this cycle of like, oh, what did I do wrong? And it's not about that. If you think about what's going wrong, it's just going to magnify that, and it's going to get bigger, and it's going to get more difficult. You always just have to go back to focusing on your best process. That's how you are successful. You might get fortunate and things might work out for you without using your best process, but that's not a reliable system to get what you want. A reliable system is something that you can act upon, and that isn't just something that it's external to you, that just is a bonus that you receive just by being there, because the opponent is going to receive the same bonuses that you do, and that if they have a better process than you, it's likely that the outcome is going to go their way because they're actually controlling as much about the moment as they can through having an actionable series of steps that they can follow at all times. And ultimately it comes down to knowing your process, evolving your process, and sticking with it, and and continuing to master it and to habituate it so much that where you don't even realize that you're doing it, because that's actually what's happening all the time. Is that so many people, you're just going through the motions that you've always done, but if you haven't taken a step back and looked to see what your process is, you won't realize when you're using your best process. You won't realize when you're using a substandard, a weaker process. And if you're consciously trying to evolve, then at least with my game, for example, I'm always trying to remove extra things from my game to simplify it, so there's less that I have to remember. And then I'm also trying to get certain things and kind of batch them together so that it's just one thing by mastering each little increment. Then if I get several increments that are in a step by step, then I can batch them all into one thing, and it becomes one bigger thing, and then that becomes the part of a bigger process, which is all locked in.
Lee Baldwin is on. He's asking,
Good morning,
what was
Lee.
your highest pressure situation in pool ever, and what did you do to cope, and what was the outcome?
I think that it's a difficult question to answer. I'd say pressure is a little bit different than people think. I moved to Vegas when I was 23 or 24 years old and tried to play pool for a living, and I was not nearly as good enough to do that. And when I finally ran out of money, the last set that I played the best pool of my life, and I still lost because I was playing against a player that was better than me. And then I had to go home. And at the moment, I knew that I was on my last money and that I was going to have to either borrow money or use my credit cards to get home. But I wouldn't say that made me fall apart. I just didn't know what I was doing, and I was really just in a situation where I couldn't be successful, and I put myself in that situation. And then the pressure that I felt was mostly off of my lack of having a clear direction. You're not going to feel pressure if you know what you're supposed to do in the situation. If you put yourself in a situation where you can't be successful, then it's going to be very difficult to get anything productive to happen. And I think that when you're playing against top players or better players than you, people automatically put themselves in a situation where they can't be successful because their determination of what success is has to do with winning. And if that's what your focus is winning, then you need to put yourself into different situations, because in order to guarantee success, you basically just need to go and find weaker players to play. So if you're feeling pressure when you're playing against better players, that's because you have an expectation that you're supposed to win. And that's not how you beat better players. You beat better players by taking advantage of any opportunity that they give you, and that you do your best in those situations, and that's all you can control, is doing your best. If that has to do with controlling your emotions, then that is what it is. It's not just about physical expressions. It's about, if you're feeling pressure, I played against Shane Van Boening, it's many years ago, and I'm sure that some people have watched that match either after the fact or maybe were in the facility or whatever, heard about it. And I played great pool that, and I had a chance to win at the end and didn't win. But at all the whole time is that it doesn't matter who you're playing against. If you start thinking about that, you've already lost, because your opponent is not thinking about you when they're trying to make balls. They are thinking about how to make the ball. And if you can't focus on what's important, which is what your process is, you're going to feel more pressure because you're looking at things that you have no control over, and then you're trying to control the outcome. And that doesn't work. That's how you feel pressure. If you just realize that all you can do is when it's not your turn, you sit in your chair and you wait peacefully for your opportunity, and then if it never comes, then you just shake hands like a gentleman and you move forward with your life. And if you do have opportunities, and maybe they're really difficult, and you're shooting a lot of unfamiliar shots, you don't know the outcome because you just haven't been put enough time in, then now, you won't feel pressure so much because you realize is that, well, I did it to myself by not being prepared properly. I'm in a situation where I have all these shots that I'm shooting that I'm unfamiliar with and I'm not ready to do, and then here I am expecting myself to do them. That's why you're feeling pressure, because you have an expectation that you're going to be able to accomplish all the shots that are in front of you without actually having, relative mastery of those techniques. And then you're trying to beat somebody that plays better than you maybe overall, which can happen, but it has to be like the stars have to align, where you have to have actually shots that are accomplishable for you, and then you got to also sort of have an expectation that your opponent needs to play subpar for their high ability, and that's how you're going to win. Is that you can't really expect to beat a top player if they're playing their best game, because their best game is such a high gear that it's really not accomplishable or achievable, for most players in these longer sets that you're going to be normally playing them against. So as far as like feeling pressure, I wouldn't say that I feel more pressure in the finals of a tournament than I do in the first match of a tournament. I normally feel more nerves and things like that at the beginning of a tournament because I'm not yet ready necessarily or warmed up enough to be able to guarantee that I can play at high gear. And that the further I go in a tournament, the more often I start playing better and better until the end, in which case it's more of a stamina issue, more so than an ability issue. Is that if you are playing in a weekend tournament and you have to play many matches, at the end of that, it's kind of a grind. It gets to be where you don't have necessarily the ideal situation to perform, and that you just have to like have the endurance and stamina to be ready to go at the end and be as fresh as you can at the end, which I think when you're younger you kind of overcome just through having a higher energy level, and then as you're older you overcome that by trying to keep yourself in shape a little bit, and then also having a streamlined process that you don't have to work as hard to accomplish, which is really what I'm trying to develop for myself. As I get older, I'm just trying to streamline what I do so that I can do it more easily, and thus, in effect, have more energy left at the end of these tournaments, so that I can then come with more energy at the end of the tournament when it's necessary. And that I find that a lot of people, they burn themselves out early on. They feel the pressure, and then they work really, really, really hard, and then they run out of steam before they get into the middle of the match. I don't know how many times I play against people and they play so good on me the first set, and then they lose their next match to a weak player, and then they get just a little bit whatever, and then they're out of the tournament. And meanwhile I'm just grinding it out because I know that there's like, well, you were trying too hard the whole time, and then it's inevitable that you're going to fail because you're not dealing with the pressure properly. You're trying to fight pressure with pressure, and that's not how it really works. You have to fight pressure with conscious coolness and doing things like that. And as you're going to get older, I think you start realizing that the pressure is it's because you care so much that you're feeling pressure. There's no one squeezing me when I'm playing in a match. There's no one stopping me from doing what I'm trying to do. I'm stopping myself by feeling like I have no control over what's going on. Meanwhile, I don't not have control. What I do have is the ability to control my perspective about what's going on in a way to alleviate some of that pressure, and just realize that whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And by focusing too much on what I hope the outcome is going to be, I'm actually just drawing myself further away from that. What I need to do is bring myself to this current moment, and then just be like, okay, what needs to be done right now, and then make some clear decisions about what the next obvious step is, and then just do the next thing. And then if you do that properly and you put your best energy into that next thing, then you just have to carry that moment through the rest of the moments that occur, because that is the moment where you're like, this is one perfect moment. I'm making a clear decision about what I'm going to do, then I'm going to execute on that as best I can, and then you do that thing, and then you've executed as best you can. It doesn't matter if the ball's gone in or not. That's the perfect moment. That was the best you could have done. If I wasn't, if I spent more time being more prepared, then maybe I would have made that ball that I missed, or I would have recognized that the rails are a little bit weird, so that bank shot went long or short, and that But then by being in the moment, you're going to see that, because part of your best process should include a data collection phase, so that then you can use that to be better prepared for your next opportunity. Each effort has an opportunity for data collection and knowledge gain, and then learning, and then a slight modification in your shot selection or the way that you hit the ball or whatever, so that your next strike is going to be that much better, because of the energy that you're putting forth through your objective awareness about what's actually going on with the physics of the game. And that can take the pressure off of you, because once you be like, whoa, well, if I shoot every shot that I shoot, I try to collect data, and every shot that my opponent shoots, I'm collecting data, and I'm going to use all that data as best as I can to make better decisions for myself, identify weaknesses in my opponent, exploiting, and then at each decision I'm going to exploit my opponent's weaknesses, and I'm going to try to steer away from my own weaknesses necessarily, use my strengths as best as I can, and and if I focus on that, that's the best that I can do. I can't control whether or not my opponent has a transcendent performance, or that there's other things that can happen too, so distractions, etc. You deal with that the best you can, and focusing on the process is what really gets you there. That's how you can avoid feeling that pressure. This video is more about when you're on tilt, not when you're feeling pressure. I always play better when I feel pressure, because that is just how I am. I might not necessarily win. What happens is, if I let the pressure get to me, then I've gone on tilt, and then now we're not dealing with pressure anymore. What you're dealing with is you're emotionally compromised. That's not pressure. That's different. If you fall apart because you have an expectation that you're going to win, well, you're not dealing with the pressure properly. My opinion is, if you use the quote, it's like, pressure makes diamonds. That's how it is. If you don't accept that there's going to be pressure, and then you'd be like, well, what am I going to do when there's real pressure? Be like, well, what can you do? The only thing that you can do is use your best process. That is always the answer to everything. Is if you come with your best process, you have nothing to feel bad about at the end of the set. That's legitimate. If you didn't make the ball, you didn't make the ball. And if you didn't make it because you weren't following your best process, meaning that you could kind of sense that you're shooting the wrong shot and you shot it anyways, well, that's obviously not your best process. But then if you do that, knowing that you're doing that, even if it's just like a subconscious knowing that you're doing something you shouldn't do, and then you do it anyways, and then you have a bad result, that's how you break yourself down, is by not recognizing that you're about to use a substandard and inferior process to what your best process is, and you don't get up when you need to get up, and you don't take the extra moment to go and look to see if the ball goes, or just to check to verify exactly where you want to be. All that pressure that you feel, there's an answer that's on the table. That's the thing, is like everything in pool, it's all right here. If you have a question about what's going to happen, you can go look. And if you don't know what's going to happen, then it's outside of your control. And then you don't have to worry about it anymore. You're just hoping for the best, which is actually a legitimate strategy. Like, well, I don't know necessarily if I'm going to make this long shot. If you're like in the jaws of the hole and you're shooting a super thin cut, who knows if it's going to go in. But if you can't think of a better shot than to try to make it, what can you can't be mad about it. Be like, well, I could have played it safe there. But like, well, what safe could you have played? If you couldn't have thought of anything in the moment, then you need to train yourself to find shots, set that up and be like, okay, well, what is the legitimate shot? And that actually just makes me think about a situation where I tried to cut a ball in the other day, and I realize now, based on where the position of it was, is I should have tried to bank it 4 rails. It would have been easier, and I tried to cut it in. And I'm like, but this is like, I missed a shot, I made a mistake, and I've been like thinking about what's my solution. And well, I don't really have a solution, It's just like you shoot the shot, you missed, and then it causes you to lose, and then hopefully you can get some learning from that, But I'm not going to feel pressure necessarily, knowing that it's a difficult situation. Pressure is so illusionary that it's like, well, why do you feel pressure? Like, well, you can feel pressure for any reason. and it's all personal, so it's speaking towards having an emotional moment that causes you to then fall off your good spot that you're at. The main discussion here is of what techniques can we use, and like the awareness of what you're doing, that what you're feeling is first, and then you gotta make it okay to feel that emotion. First of all, if it's not okay to feel the emotion and you're feeling it, it's just going to get harder. It's going to get worse. So we got to be okay with that. Then the next thing is, okay, well, what can I do about it? Well, like, this is where enforcing your best process comes into play, where it's like, if you have techniques that you use to take your mind away from what you're feeling and more towards what you can do about it, such as mindfulness exercises, etc. Like, there's so many things you can do. If you're feeling extra tension and pressure, well, then you need to figure out a way to release that energy, and you can do a lot of things. Like, for instance, you can like squeeze your hands as hard as you can for 60 seconds, and then you won't have any tension in your hands because you're going to be so tired after just squeezing so hard that there won't be any tension left, and then that's all you have to do. That makes it go away. The thing is that if you don't have it set up in your mind that that's one of the things that I can do to alleviate some of this extra energy that I have, then you won't necessarily remember it at the moment. The whole goal is to be able to restart our system and then get back to that good place once we've fallen off our place that we're at. The thing is that the cycle is an automatic thing where it's like inevitably you will come back to a place where you feel good again. The thing is that moment might occur after the set's over, and now you've like lost that. It was like, well, I was playing bad and I didn't pull out of it, and then I lost, and now I'm okay with it. I've like let myself have that moment of reflection, and then now I'm feeling good again. But the thing is that at the moment that you're feeling that way, you can speed that whole process up by realizing that, well, eventually I'm going to feel better anyway, so now it might as well be that time. And then you start talking yourself into getting back to the place where you're feeling good through understanding that this is just a clear representation of the cycle of how things go. You're going to constantly be faced with the same sorts of emotions and challenges forever until you learn how to deal with them. And that the way that I kind of see it is that you want to feel all of those emotions as early as possible so you can learn techniques to deal with them, and then you can just move forward. And that when you're feeling pressure and you're letting the emotions get to you, that's actually an indication that that's the next thing that you need to work on with your process, which is that you have to have a process by which you stay centered, either through adding breathing technique to your pre-shot routine, which is what I do. I have breathing exercises that I do while I'm playing. I have a method that I use that helps me burn extra energy, and that when I'm in situations where I need to win, as soon as I realize, okay, this is the moment where I have to do all of these things, then I have a process by which I use, which is that at any moment, if I start to feel some sort of way, and it doesn't even matter what way, there's only one zone, everything else is not the zone. As soon as you start to feel like you're not in the zone, you have to immediately be like, okay, what am I feeling right now? And then based off of what that feeling is, you will know what your own cycle is, and then you will then be able to get yourself back to that place where you're not feeling those emotions. And it's a wide variety of different things. If you start to get like, oh, well, I'm a little bit lackadaisical because I don't feel like my opponent is a worthy opponent, so I'm just going to like take it easy here. And then all of a sudden they start to play a little bit better, or you miss an easy ball because you're not following your best process, because you're being a little bit lazy and you think that you can just mess around and get it done, then now all of a sudden you're in that problem but that was all because you let yourself be out of the zone. You're like telling yourself, I don't need to be in the zone to beat this guy. And then, well, of course, then you're not going to be in the zone, but the problem is that you got to practice that. And any sort of emotion other than no emotion is really going to hurt you in the long run, because you're going to either like enjoy the feeling of it but not be able to hold it in because it only lasts so long, and then it's gone, and then now you're like, oh, where did it go? Well, it was only going to be there for a little while, so you can't be sad about it when you're not feeling it anymore. Then you're like drawing yourself into like, oh, I need to feel a certain way. Like, well, really, to me, when you're playing your best pool, there's an absence of those feelings. There's no feeling going on, because you're concentrating on something that has nothing to do with the emotions. If you're focusing on your emotions the whole time and trying to control your emotions, you're going to mostly fail at that, because you really don't have as much control over that as you think. You feel good as a result of what you're doing a lot of the time, and vice versa, and it's kind of a paradox. It's like no one really knows exactly how it all works. They say that you feel your emotion before you act on it. So it's like, who knows where the emotion comes from? It's an internal stimulus, an external stimulus. You could be feeling a little bit, and then a guy could walk by, and now you're using that person as the target, but you're already feeling in a way that would allow that person to distract you. If you were fully focused on this moment, you might see that person and not have it distract you. Or you might decide that it's actually important enough for me to come back to this moment, as soon as that person walks by, and then I can just get up, reset, and get back in there and follow my best process. And if you don't have that process of be like, well, when it really matters, I'm going to get up, I'm going to wait until I feel perfect before I shoot every shot, and then you do that, then you also have to add in this of like, well, if I don't want it to take forever, have every little distraction bother me, then I need to find a way to focus better. And that's just by having a more detailed process. If you have 100 steps in your process and you've memorized them and you can follow them by rote, then it's going to be difficult for someone to distract you when you're on step 25 and you're like, okay, step 26 is XYZ, step 27 is XYZ plus 1, and then we just keep moving down the chain, and then when someone distracts you, be like, well, you start over and you just go back down the process. As long as we know that we follow this 100-step process perfectly. I hope it's not 100 steps in anyone's case, really. That's a lot to remember. But point being is that you always have something that you know is your process. As soon as you get distracted, you just stop, and then you just restart with your process, whatever it is. And it doesn't have to be anything magical. It can just be like a centering exercise. Be like, well, someone distracted me, so I gotta take a step back, take 3 deep breaths, get myself calm, then, make a clear decision. I'm going to shoot the ball in that hole, or I'm going to play the cue ball or the object ball to that place, and then, whatever it is, 2 to 3 different things on one shot. That's pretty much all you can do. The most complicated shot in pool is going to be, you make your ball, your cue ball is going to like break some balls out and play shape for another ball. That's about as complicated as you can get. Very rarely are you going to be like, okay, I'm going to play this shot, and I'm going to break the cue ball off this rack, and then I'm going to break these balls out too with the cue ball, and then I'm going to play shape for another ball, so that I can then run that. That's never, hardly does that happen. The game is way more simple than that, and we make it, we realize that it's simple instinctively, and then we don't make clear decisions, even though that's all we had to do is just make a clear decision. But by making clear decisions, we're simplifying the game even more. And we're like, there's less questions, but in order to do that, we have to have that in our process, which is so much of it's process oriented, because human beings are very habitual. And as you identify, okay, what is my, best process, then these emotions and stuff will not affect you nearly as much, because you already know how you're going to come back to the place where you're feeling good, because you know that this best process involves feeling like confident and all that, because you built in exercises of the way that you're viewing the narrative of what's going on, etc. When you're sitting in the chair when it's not your turn, if you're having negative self-talk going on, then now you need to really identify, okay, well, I need to add positive self-talk to my chair game. And that's an adjustment process that will then take negative emotions from me being attached to them so much, and then attaching stronger, and then resonating, and then habitualizing them through not changing my process. if I don't change my process and when I'm recognizing that I have negative self-talk, then how will I ever get rid of it? It doesn't go away through more success, because you're just enforcing the fact that negative self-talk doesn't actually affect your results negatively, because you're still succeeding. It has to be, the process has to be the most important thing. When you identify anything that can affect your game negatively, you should try to remove it and then enforce something positive in there. Like these emotions, these unwanted emotions are definitely high on the list, and to say that there's like one cookie cutter method about how to remove them it's just not how it works. Everyone is an individual, and because of that, it's very self-directed, and identifying in yourself what caused you to break free, break into these like emotional states, feeling these unwanted emotions. And we have to like really work hard to find out what tricks and tactics we can use to get ourselves back in there. And a lot of that has to do with understanding what our own narratives are and adjusting those narratives to make everything way more okay and less important, because we know that like, okay, well, if I want to be a great pool player, if I want it so bad that every time I miss a ball that I'm going to torture myself internally, it's going to be very difficult to have a good life, even if I become a great pool player, because I'm forcing myself to have these negative, feelings every time I miss a shot, which is an inevitable event. You can't avoid missing balls. There's no pros that make every shot that they shoot at. They will miss eventually, and they know that. And they also know that that shot that they miss is a great opportunity to learn, because those mistakes are the ones that teach you how to make that shot. They're like, oh, well, I didn't know that I needed to work on that shot, so now I have something to do. So they've decided, instead of having that negative self-talk where I screwed up and now I've lost the game, they're like, okay, it's in my practice routine now. I'm going to put that shot in there for a couple weeks and really master it and get it down to where the next time I'm in a similar situation, I'm going to be successful. And they're creating a narrative in their mind that allows them to continue to move forward through every obstacle that they have in front of them. They can figure out a way in their mind to make everything work out in their best interest, no matter what happens. It's you never know how good you're going to get at pool. I think that people think that it's easy to be a professional pool player. All you have to do is you quit your job, and then it's like, well, if you don't like traveling, you don't like eating in different places, and maybe you like staying home, maybe you've got a dog, maybe you got kids or a job that you enjoy, it's not so easy, so it's like you can't necessarily say, oh, I'm going to be a professional pool player and then actually have that be reasonable. There's a lot of infrastructure type things that go into making that happen, and because of that, we're not going to be able to spend 8 to 10 hours a day just working on our pool game, so that we have max preparation. We're going to be faced with the fact that we have a limited amount of time to use playing the game, and that we have to structure our emotional state around the fact that we're not going to ever be fully prepared. We are just going to have the game that we show up with, and that we're going to use every moment when we're at the table, ideally, with the intent to improve through working into a better process. And that process includes dealing with these negative emotions when they occur and having techniques to deal with them. And that if you focus on dealing with these negative emotions and the negative self-talk and stuff like that, then you'll realize that the pressure really comes from not having techniques to deal with them, not so much any other thing. If you don't have a way to deal with these emotions when they come, you won't be able to deal with them, and then that's where your breakdowns come from. And then once you have techniques, then you're not afraid of the emotion anymore, because you're like, well, as soon as I start to be nervous, then I just be like, oh, well, I'm feeling nervous. This is actually what I showed up here for, was to feel these negative emotions. And now I'm actually winning, because that's all I came here to do, is recognize when I have a negative emotion, and then exercise my little routine that I'm working on perfecting. And then I'm going to decide, okay, well, did that work or not? And then if it did work, you're probably going to win the set, because now you're feeling good. And if it didn't work, then you just need to try something different until you find another way that does work. And then by then you be like realize, well, there's only so many different techniques, and one of them will eventually will work. So I'll have this beat eventually. And then in your mind, it's like, well, then how often are you going to have a negative, emotion happen to you? It's way less often, because you're already going to be like, it's all good anyways, and at the moment I'm feeling it. It's just kind of like a joke, because it's like, well, this is what we showed up for. It's like, I don't play the game to not feel emotions necessarily. Like, I like to feel the satisfaction of, doing the thing properly. And I also enjoy the challenge of, when I feel negative emotions, then I use those techniques and processes to, break through that, and then get back into my gear. And that's even more satisfying almost. It's like playing poorly and then figuring it all out and then coming back is a great feeling, where you're like, oh, I was playing like trash, but I figured it out. I was like not really feeling good, and I was like, you know what? I don't want to feel that way. I actually just want to feel good right now. And then you just let it all go. I don't care if I win or lose. What I want here, what I really am going to do, is focus on playing good and feeling good, and not thinking about how, if I continue to play bad, I'm going to lose. Because that's the negative self-talk. It's very creeps in, just a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's bigger, and then all of a sudden you're talking about how your life sucks. It's not good. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things where you gotta like nip it in the bud, and really recognizing yourself when you're actually starting to do it to yourself. Because that's what happens, is like you're setting yourself up for these events through our cycles. Recognizing that we have these cycles as first and foremost, and then just developing techniques. And if anybody, if you're looking for techniques, to help you master your emotions, there's a billion of them. So you just have to do a little bit of AI searching, or YouTube, or Facebook, or Instagram, and I'm sure that you can find, a million hours. They're putting thousands of hours of video into these, onto the internet every 20 minutes now. It's like you'll never be able to reach the end of it, and there's got to be some of it that's going to help. It's more about searching for something that speaks to you. It's like, oh, this is a technique that I want to start using to help me, get past these negative emotions that I feel occasionally, and that I'm going to just keep trying it. And then it's an empowerment activity. And just the activity of empowering yourself helps you not have these breaks, because you're kind of shifting your mindset from being a victim to being in control of yourself. And that's really what it's all about, is like, if you keep feeling like you're being victimized, and that life's unfair, well, it's like, well, you're doing it to yourself by not preparing yourself with techniques that you could be preparing yourself with, that are readily available, publicly available. If you have a cell phone, you have access to pretty much, the world, the culmination of the entirety of what is known in human existence is on your phone, basically, minus the new stuff that's constantly being evolved. And even that stuff, if you really want to know what's coming out new, then you just have to go and figure out where that's coming from, and then pay attention to those people that are at the cutting edge of whatever the topic is. But like this, there's tons of research on the emotions and how to deal with them, meditation techniques, etc. These are all very good things. They're not necessarily things that are going to work for every person. Myself, I'm off and on with meditation. I think that it's good to learn how to get your mind in a clear state, but I think a lot of that has to do with just removing noise, and over time, you can figure it all out. Do you have anything else, Vic? I feel like I'm just going on and on about this. My main takeaway here for everyone, as far as when you go on tilt, is recognize that you're on tilt, be okay with it, find your emotion that you want to, or whatever that you're trying to get to, whatever it is. When you're in the down cycle, it's like, well, what's up here? And try to get back here, or at least get to I recommend always trying to stay kind of in the level close to balance, so that you're not getting too high or too low, because if you get too high, the crash will happen. If you're too low, you're in hell. You don't want that. You know what I mean? It's more about like, okay, I'm starting to get a little bit like I'm, maybe I'm feeling a little bit too much energy level, and then that's gonna maybe make me, make quick decisions and not clearly decide what I'm going to do. So I like to be a little bit more in the middle ground, balanced feeling, because I think that's it's a good way to play pool. Is you're not riding the high emotions and the low emotions and the high emotions and low emotions constantly, where you're either playing like so good that you feel like you're unbeatable, and then as soon as you miss, you're like crash and burn, and now you're like oh, I can't make a ball, and blah 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 blah. That's it's for me, I don't want to be in that spot. So I focus more on just it's more like a workman-like thing. You just show up, you do your job as best you can, and then at the end of it, if they give you money, then you get money. I don't know what to tell you. If you do a good job, you get money. That's how I look at it. I'm more focused on doing a good job than I am about getting money. I know that I'll get money if I, or I'll win the tournament or whatever. If I do a good job, if I have a performance that's worthy, then I will get paid. It's not about whether or not I want it or not. I'm not doing it to get the money. I'm doing it because I want to do a good job. And focusing on that, it's like, well, you can't always execute perfectly on your strategy. Sometimes you're going to make mistakes, but that overall, as we try to develop, our game, you're going to have more good performances than bad ones, especially when you just really are just continue to hone your process, so the emotional ups and downs of it are just a natural part of like, okay, well, when I'm feeling negative emotions, like you just accept that you're feeling it, you find a centering exercise, you get back in there, but knowing that you have a process that is your best process and is what's going to keep you there, because as you see that if I execute on my process, then that I'm going to have a reward and a chemical reward from that by executing on the process. Be like, oh, well, I was feeling some sort of way, then I realized that I was feeling that way, and then I exercised my process where I was like, ooh, this is what I was going to tell myself to do, is do this little technique. And then now I did the technique, and yeah, maybe it didn't work or it did work, but after the fact, you'll be realizing that it's like, oh, well, I was at least in that moment where I was like, oh, maybe it didn't work out, but at least I recognized that I was trying to do something about it, and that itself is a positive. That's a win. So the framing of the conversation about how you're talking about what you're doing is equally as important to actually experiencing the emotion, if that makes sense. So I think that's basically going to wrap it up. So much of what happens to us is just like we're doing it to ourselves. We have to realize that, accept it, and then empower ourselves to develop techniques that are going to help us get through these moments, whether or not it's through practicing or through, some sort of mindfulness exercises or, reframing exercises. I think reframing is a great thing, where the way that we narrate our lives to ourselves and to other people by telling stories about it, it's like, well, if you're focusing too many of the negative things, and you keep explaining how bad things keep happening to you, that is a habit, and now you're going to be looking for bad things to talk about all the time, and then you're drawing bad things to you ultimately because you want those bad things to happen so you can talk about them, and that's really not what I want with my life. That's why I don't just try, but I do really well, and I'm working hard to reduce the amount of negative things that I talk about, because I'm not in denial of negativity or anything like that. I just feel like for myself is that every challenge has a solution, and thus by even speaking about it like it's a bad thing isn't really the way that it is to me. It's just a challenge that I got to overcome. If you're feeling negative emotions, that's totally fine. That's normal. The question is, what are you going to do about it always? And that if you have something that you're going to try to do about it, then now you're on the road to defeating that opponent, which most of the opponents are inside of us, things that we're dealing with inside of ourselves, and just realizing that it's not you versus the opponent. It's mostly you versus you. You're defeating yourself through not developing techniques to move yourself forward, because no one else is going to do that work for you. So I hope that this little segment has helped you all figure out couple more different things. It's like that feeling that pressure is natural, but I wouldn't say that pressure is necessarily the thing that triggers the emotion. It's easy to just go on tilt for no reason, and pressure a lot of times is like if you were to go and play in pro tournaments repeatedly, even if you lose and you're out in 2 and you never win a rack, eventually you'll feel less pressure playing against great players through the experience of doing that. So I don't think necessarily that pressure is the thing that causes the emotions to happen, or the knowledge that you're going to lose if you don't shoot the shot. You get used to that. The question is more of like, how are we triggering our own negative emotions, and then what are we going to do about that? Because when we start to feel a negative emotion, that's when we can start to be a little bit more unsuccessful with the results that we're getting, because we're drawing that to us by focusing too much on that negativity. And then by just reframing and moving towards positivity, we're going to eventually have more success, even though we're having maybe limited success at this moment. It's not about necessarily what happens in this moment. It's about how we're the trend of going to the better thing, and just recognizing that we can zoom out from this moment that's here and look at the body of work and say, overall, I'm being more and more successful with the things that are important, which is not necessarily making that shot. It's about, dealing with the things that come and the best we can, and we're going to get ours over time if we continue to work at it and do our best. There's not so many people out there that are all grinding it, trying to get really good and do all the things. There's so many people that are like haphazardly just going through their lives, not really focused on, the things that can really help them. And, in a way that's unfortunate, and then in a way that actually is really what makes life so much easier for people that are willing to do the work, is that, well, there's not a lot of people out there doing the work. So then now anyone that is willing to do the work is going to do really, really well. And that's kind of what happens, where there's just so many people that are playing pool that are not really working. They're working hard to get better and not trying to develop new techniques to get better. And that's why so many people are not great at the game, and that the ones that are great are just literally just doing the most obvious next thing to get better, and they just repeatedly do that thing until they find another thing that's obvious that they need to do better, and then they move to that. And just by having that as your process, recognizing what you need to work on, that is its own empowerment activity, and it removes negativity from your life slowly but surely, because there's nothing else that can happen, really. So, I hope that all helps. If you guys, anybody that's watching this to this point, appreciate your time. As always, we have the school group. It should be pinned. You can join that. We would love to have ideas for what to talk about come from the community rather than from myself or Vic. So any sorts of comments that are put in here really are appreciated. If you have a topic that you'd like me to discuss in the future, because we're doing these streams pretty much weekly, just put something out there. It's been months that no one has said a thing about this. Every week we're having one of these things. I know people are watching. I know that most of the things that any single person has a struggle with, most other people are struggling with those things too. So really, and I know it's going to be anonymous if you choose to be, but we would really love to have a little bit more things that are community driven to talk about. So with that being said, have a great day. Thank you.